underrated advice?
Oh, underrated advice. Drink water.
Best advice you'd give your 20-year-old self?
Man, best advice is probably don't wait.
Welcome to Vermilion Cliff Notes. I'm Ashley Smith, founder and partner at Vermilion Cliff Ventures. It's an early stage venture fund that we primarily back technical founders building technical products. Today, I'll be interviewing my friend and briefly a colleague, Brian Douglas, B. Dougie, who is currently head of developer experience at Continue. He has founded a company before. He was at GitHub. He's done all sorts of great things in startup land, open source, tech, really just well-rounded individual that knows a little bit about everything. So, Brian, it is so good to see you. Welcome. And where are you today?
I am actually in the Continue office here in San Francisco. Yeah, so about a block from the Salesforce Tower.
Oh, nice. Fabulous. Obviously, I know you pretty well. I know your story. But for those that don't, would you mind just, a brief introduction?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I'm developer experience at Continue. I've previously done DevRel at GitHub. Netlify was first advocate, but really I was third engineer hired.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know that.
Yeah. So I actually from Florida, originally Tampa, Florida, went to school out there as well, and then moved out to San Francisco for startups. Long story short, I learned how to code while getting my MBA. So I kind of pivoted from doing sales to doing just full-time coding, that now doing sort of like a hybrid, which is like developer experience.
Okay, right. So you grew up in Florida. Was technology like in your household, or was it something that, were you always a nerd, or was it something you developed later in life?
No, I'd say that I've got two brothers, and like we were all very like video games. Definitely was our entry point. So we had like the Nintendos and the Segas and the Nintendo 64s and stuff like that. But growing up, there was like a pinnacle point when we moved to an apartment complex in Florida, and there was a computer in like the clubhouse next to the pool.
Right.
And some of the older kids actually would play like Wolfenstein and Doom. And eventually we started playing because they would show us how to do it. So I was always like very knowledgeable on how to like run DOS programs and stuff like that and run games. And as I got older, very literate with computers, be able to build random GeoCities sites and eventually MySpace.
Yeah.
So I think eventually a computer was in our house and we just never stopped touching it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Everyone kind of comes into tech a different way. Like I was just this nerdy child who got access to computers in elementary school and middle school and was like sneaking to the back of the classroom. And similar, I've got friends who like their apartment complex would get a computer and it would be like the business center and they would all just hang out in there all summer long. So
Yep. And appreciate folks who would let the kids hang out in there and learn stuff.
Yeah.
I will mention in middle school, I was in the gifted program. And so we did do like the Lego Mindstorm stuff and played with like old Macs and stuff like that.
Did you get evaluated for the CIA? Have you heard about that?
I don't think I did. Not that I knew of.
Yeah, apparently like a lot of the kids in gifted, they like had random government officials coming around asking questions. It might have been a little bit earlier before we were in school, but it was like
that would have been amazing.
Go deep on that rabbit hole because you'll be like, that's what those questions were for. Okay.
Yeah, that's wild.
Truly. So how did you get into startups? So you mentioned like from Florida to San Francisco, like what was that transition?
Yeah. So I had an idea for an app while getting my MBA, which I ended up building. I Googled like how to build a mobile app and eventually stumbled into Ruby on Rails. And that turned into, I started going to meetups local in Orlando, eventually moved to Orlando to take a startup job. And it was just by just being part of the community that I didn't know existed. So I also at that point was like, I'm going to learn this and I'm also going to like write it down. So I started a blog, and that blog is like the reason why I got into startups. People started reading it. I used to throw it up on Twitter. I didn't have any like a huge following. I maybe had like 50 people following, mostly friends from college. And then people started responding to the blog posts I was randomly putting up there because I was using like the Ruby hashtags and stuff like that. And that turned into someone reaching out and saying you should interview for a job in San Francisco.
That's so interesting. So I've been a computer person forever, but in college we were having tweet ups. And so everyone that there was like this small Twitter group in Atlanta that we would all go to these tweet ups where you meet people that were online, which in retrospect, probably it was fine. but
Did you go
it's
to Georgia Tech? Was that
yeah,
your college?
yeah.
Okay.
And so, like, it was kinda how I got exposed to like, I'd always been a computer engineering type brain person, but it was my first exposure to startup culture. So, yeah, early Twitter was kinda where it was at, and my friends would have blogs similar, and they would get picked up, and then we networked that way, so, yeah, similar background.
Excellent.
And so you founded a company. I would love to hear more about that. When was it? What did it do? What was your journey there?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, technically, I started the idea in 2017. I was working at Netlify. I was building a bunch of sites to help show Netlify being used,
Yep.
sort of doing the developer experience thing. And it was like basically a CRM for managing my open source contributions. And so it's like not quite a CRM, but that's the best way to explain it. And then that's what got me invited to work at GitHub. I spoke at GitHub Universe on stage about this using GraphQL. Ended up joining John Britton's team and doing the DevRel thing there. And I kind of put it on the shelf for quite a bit until 2020. And then I started building it like fully featured and functional. So I decided leaving in 2022 to work on OpenSauced, which is the name of the product, full time. And it was essentially GitHub Insights, but better. So I found some really like we would talk to a bunch of top open source projects on a weekly basis. Really, every week would be a new project, and find out what was missing in GitHub. Insights kept coming up over and over again. Decided to like build essentially let's build very core insights. We never went like super deep data science. We had like 4 or 5, and we'd show you a repo, and then we tell a story, and then you could add more repos to a workspace, and then eventually what it turned into is like Ospos really liked it, which ironically Ospos don't have a ton of budget, but the companies that support Ospos and donate to foundations do have a lot of budget. So we ended up finding a niche in supporting large companies like a Capital One or Amex, or we didn't quite sell to Stripe, but like we had a really good story for them. They just
Yeah.
had the team sort of had a bit of a layoff, but that was the idea: is like provide insights to show if you're doing a good job or a bad job at open source.
Okay. And what was the most surprising thing? Like, so I was always an operator. Being a founder is a very different, like, emotional journey, I feel. What was the most surprising thing you learned while building the company?
Yeah, I mean, because I had so much momentum. Been sitting on this idea for 5 years. I worked at GitHub, kind of saw how the sausage was made, saw this product internally fail twice. Because of all that momentum, like I didn't really have a slow time. It was more of like, it turned out I kind of knew what I was talking about or what I was doing, and I had a good network to go sell to and hang out with. So I had a very different experience than most startup founders where you spend like months or 6 months trying to figure out what you're actually going to build. We built it. And then we ended up getting seed funded within 6 months, and then went to grow and scale the thing. And the momentum never stopped thanks to AI. So we ended up taking all this data, and then ChatGPT came out, and then OpenAI started really giving more knowledge around what they were doing. So we ended up turning what we built into a RAG, which we called Star Search. And Star Search is essentially the ability to ask the question in natural language of like, tell me how we got to this problem or what's happening in this project. And at that point is when the acquisition conversation started. And so we went from like hype to maybe we figure out if we're going to go to the next level, or we just go ahead and like get absorbed somewhere else. And I
Right.
went with the latter.
Yep. And you mentioned raising a seed round. What was your VC experience like? How much did you raise? Was it quick? You said you did it within 6 months, which in today's market is fast. So, walk me through that.
Yeah, I mean, so we didn't start the actual time of raising was actually 4 weeks for our seed, and that was mainly because my angels. I did a pre-seed with like just angels, so a lot of folks like Nat Friedman, Tom Presser Warner. I just asked them, like, they knew who I was. It was like, hey, I've got this idea I can't stop thinking about. Would you like to drop a check? Your name would be super powerful in this situation. So like the angel round was like a week. We raised about 1 million, and then the seed round was about 4 weeks, and that was about 2.5. And my experience was great because one of my angels previously was my lead investor from Bold Start Ventures, Ellen Chisa.
Yep.
So we already had a relationship previously. I had worked while she was running a company. I was running a GitHub while she ran a company. So I knew of her then. And then we sort of reconnected when she decided to angel into OpenSauced. So we spent about a year sort of like me noodling on the idea, eventually building the thing, getting customers, to eventually going and raising a round. So she said, hey, I could lead the round. So it was a little bit, I guess what I learned is it is a relationship thing. A lot of the sort of validation of like de-risking investors, especially at the seed round. I did a lot of that just by, I'm a bit of a talker. I do podcasts, I write blog posts. My investor updates are very consistent. And I wouldn't say thorough, but they were informative. So I had enough information to like make
Yeah.
sure people knew what the story that was going to be told. So for that reason, the story was told for Ellen. She came on board. For everyone else who came aboard, I had like a history that I was able to provide. So yeah, first time founder, but like it was a great experience where I think everyone was extremely supportive and responsive to like my updates and as we were hitting our next stage.
Yeah. Ellen's amazing. So great job having her as an investor. And people don't realize how important the investor updates are. Some people don't send any, and some send like
Yeah.
really strong ones where I know exactly what's going on in the business with a specific ask at the end. And it really makes it easier for me to stay engaged and also see if I want to work together.
Yeah, and
Um,
I would say as an angel investor as well, like I took the updates that I enjoyed, the ones that I felt like I was part of the process and part of the experience and the journey. I just mirrored that. So I think it helped also because I did do angel checks prior to starting a company.
yep. Any other advice you have for founders? This market's a bit volatile. So any tidbits that you think would be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, so I am like dumbfounded on how fast AI is like really
Yeah.
unlocked. Like I feel like we joked about 10x engineers, but I feel like I'm a 10x engineer today,
Yeah.
despite not working full time on a product for years. So I guess what I'm getting at is like definitely like you got to really lean into like where the switch situation is. I think when you go to like present and pitch and do a pitch deck, it's going to be so much easier when you have a full on prototype with users and hopefully customers. So my recommendation is like do as much as you can before you raise. Like, see how far you can take it, even if it's like give someone like $500 a month for on contract to see if they can help expand your bandwidth if you're already working full time. But I highly recommend that. Like, I spent 5 years noodling on the idea. I had a bit more to show. I didn't have the product we ended up shipping and raising on is not what we ended up like. That's not what I had built before I left GitHub. But I had a lot of at bats to know. Okay, can I go talk to people, get some validation? So if we had customer evidence prior to raising money, which should help a ton.
Yeah. Well, speaking of open source, you're basically an expert, right? You've worked around it, built companies around it. It's something I know that you have a podcast about, I believe.
Yeah.
I feel like AI is going fast, and I think there's a lot of really cool open source projects popping up sort of around that. What have you been seeing, or what's been surprising lately in the communities and projects that you're a part of?
Yeah, there was a project that I think it was like a solo maintainer in Japan. So I continue, we leveraged this project called
Yeah.
RepoMix. And what I was surprised is there was a bug that was reported by one of my team members. And the response was at Claude, please fix this from the maintainer. And I was
Ow.
like, man, that is bold, but
Wow.
also Claude fixed it.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm getting at, there's like two camps happening right now where there's like folks who are fully embracing. These are like more the younger, earlier stage, if you call them early stage, but open source projects.
Yeah.
But then there's these projects that have a lot of dependencies and a lot of folks leveraging it, a lot of downstream challenges. They're a little bit more advantageous around open source, but I could see things like MCP, folks are kind of bridging the gap of like, cool, I can have a moat around what models and what's happening in there. And as long as that moat and I say MCP because that's one of the really good structures, but there's APIs as well that give you kind of a moat around between the sort of bleeding edge and the cutting edge. So like you can be cutting edge without starting to bleed. And I think that's the difference right now that people are kind of have some friction around.
Yeah.
So as far as tooling, I see a lot more open source like API gateways that manage like Open Router that manage your model usage. I see a lot of more SDKs that are managing your interactions with specifically with whatever Anthropic, OpenAI. I
I've
think that's
seen a
what
lot of
most people.
those. They're fun
Yeah,
to watch happen because you're like, this makes sense, but this is I don't know. And I've seen them like tag in Claude and things like that. Wow.
yeah, and it's interesting. So I think what people need is an abstraction away from all the craziness that's happening in AI. But I think the adoption is going to happen. Like I think folks are going to come around. People are already building full on companies and startups with like 2 people teams. Folks like I mentioned, RepoMix is being maintained with a 1 person team and being leveraged by tons of AI companies. And PG Vector is another 1 person team, just right a couple blocks away in Recon
Yeah.
Hill in one of the high rises. Guy literally just that's what he does. But like what I'm getting at is like I think we're witnessing a new evolution of what we're seeing in software. I think years ago, I think we had like the Web3 wet craze, and prior to that was like mobile. But we are now replatforming, and we're all thinking differently on how we're interacting. Like I've just spent a couple days with these guys who are doing GEO, which is how do you do SEO but LLM
Yeah.
friendly?
I'm working on a
And
blog post about it right now because everyone keeps asking me about it.
we've checked our exposure within LLMs just from 2 days worth of work.
Wow.
So it's definitely like worth digging into. So the world's changing very quickly. And I think for folks who have not been paying attention, they're all stepping into paying attention to this now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
open source is changing very quickly.
It is. The question I get a lot about open source, and I'm sure you've heard it quite a lot, is the balance of supporting the community and then monetizing an open source project.
Yeah.
There's the hybrid open source models. There's open core, I've heard it called. Even like at GitLab years ago, we like had the debate of should we be charging for this or not. How do you think about open source and monetization?
Yeah, it's changing quickly because now you can like I've just done some work where I've reverse engineered some open source stuff I
Yeah.
always wanted to publish. We just never shipped it, so I've started from memory just basically reverse engineering a couple different things. And I think your moat, like before, it was like your moat could be the core offerings, like open core, like everything's open source except the thing that like is deployed on servers that does all the database management, etc. And even that's changing where now you have like DuckDB is like trivial to run up on a duck, like $50 a month, you can have a full on instance of like massive amounts of petabytes.
Yeah.
It's insane what's accessible now thanks to open source. So I think what's really shifting is your what do you call it? Your ability to execute. So like it's not enough to have really good code because any LM could write good code. Well, decent code, I guess I would say. But now it's your execution. So like how you're presenting your user experience. Like what's the journey of progressively onboarding people to then opt them into purchasing whatever. So I've seen like I was actually just looking at a company that I don't want to expose them because I think they're actually raising a round, but they are open source first, and they have built a behemoth of a community, and they're raising a pretty decent round, first round coming out of YC. But they have so much adoption because the last 4 years they've been building this one tool. That people have ingrained in all their front end applications, and then now it's essentially it's a given that it's going to be successful, but they want to turn up to success by building a company around that. And the way they're going to do this is like still remote first company by having very domain specific experts working at the company, but then also integrating in every single tool known to man when it comes to this technologies. Sorry for being, I happened to get their pitch deck like slid to me on Friday. So I was like, I don't want to expose their
Well,
experience that's happening right now.
if you think I would like to look at it, please, by all means, make the intro. You wrote a blog post, or maybe published it like 2 weeks ago, kind of to your point about like boundaries around. I think the name of it was the Anatomy of Rules: Writing Effective Boundaries for AI Agents in Ruby. You opened with, when working with AI agents to write code, the difference between good and great results often comes down to the quality of your rules, which I'm seeing every day when I'm trying to create terrible, terrible things using Cursor.
Yeah.
I think that's the key piece for AI assisted code, right? Like we keep hearing no more developers, no more developers. And I'm like, nope, it's still really hard because you have to understand the parameters.
Yeah.
Do you think that's going to shift, or do you think there's always going to be a certain level of knowledge that you're going to have to need to build software?
So this is the bet I'm making, which
Yeah.
is I think the models are going to get bigger and better, but they're also going to be expensive first,
Yeah.
and they'll get cheaper when you use the old ones. But when I'm finding an enterprise, but also slow adopting folks, they're using older models, but they're basically fine tuning. And this is what the whole blog post and what I'm doing a series of content around is when you set up the guardrails of, okay, I'm going to use an older like 4 turbo OpenAI model, but I want it to be as good as the 4.0. So the way you get there is like, you have to give it some context of like, hey, if you're writing Ruby, here's a Ruby standard lib. Or if you're writing Ruby, this is how we write test. Or write test first. So then when you start running your agent's like, cool, I'm going to write a test, and then I'm going to generate the code. If the test pass, then I can validate, okay, at least if this code is no good in like a week or 2 weeks, at least the test will fail for you. But I think like the guy who runs Hackaprompt, I forgot his name, but he has a really good strategy around, or the sort of definitions around no shot prompts and 2-shot and few shots. So like the one shot is like, I'm going to write one sentence, I'm going to expect a full on full stack application. But if you have like 2 shots or few shots, you're like, hey, here's an application. Let me preemptively prompt you with some context. So that way you can build an app that looks like this. And that strategy itself is like completely game changing between the 0 shot and then the few shots. So when I was read the rules book, or sorry, the rules, it's not a book, it's going to be a doc eventually, but it's the Anatomy of Rules. It's like, I can write rules on how I expect Ruby code to be written. And that's going to give you the structure for the agent to have some boundaries to not go crazy. So example, last Friday, I was doing preemptively some premature optimization of my site. So SEO wise, like your site should be fast, it should load quick, like everything should be rendering quickly and everything like that. So I vibe coded an app a couple weeks ago. I was like, cool, let's make it performant because I'm ready for people to start using it. So I'm like, Claude, go make this better, make it optimized. And Claude made so many optimizations that it broke the app. So I'm like, cool, let's take all the things that broke. We're going to write a couple rules and we're going to say, hey, Claude, write some rules till this never happens again. So then I basically call it a postmortem doc and mark down. It lives within my repo. And so every time I go, hey, we're going to fix these features, but then we're also going to optimize to make sure they're fast. But look at the postmortem in addition. So you could actually load the postmortem in context. So Claude will always know, I messed up once, I will never do it again. And I could do that with the slowest. I could do 3.5 Sonnet. I could do this with Gemma 4B, and it will build a performant application because I wrote context of like, hey, we messed up once. We're never doing this again. And as engineers, we do this all the time. Like we do the blameless postmortems, we write docs. Like everyone who onboards a team has a structure. Like this is what we do. This is how we write code. But we should treat our agents the same way. So that way you're not spending so much time trying to rewrite code that's broken or trying to zero shot stuff. So that's the content I'm basically building a bit of a war chest to get people to use continue in a way that makes sense.
That's such a good point about postmortems. I also feel that all the postmortems I've been a part of, you like have this big thing and then it sort of disappears. Like you kind of forget about it after a month, maybe. I do like the idea of having one doc that it all goes into that's kind of like setting rules. So brilliant. I should do that because everything I build keeps breaking and I give up at some point and then I just build something else. You mentioned continue. You're head of developer experience and you spend a lot of time in developer relations experience. And I'm curious how you think the differences are the same. Like, is developer experience and developer relations the same thing? You think it's different? Is one nested in the other? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I'd say like at the stage that we're at, which is team of 7, it is the same thing. So developer relations, you show up at events, you connect with developers that are using your product. You try to get more folks to use your product. Experience, again, I feel like it's just two sides of the same coin. But the experience side, it's really where we need a lot of help on today is like onboarding. So like we want folks to find a path and a workflow that works for them. And the product itself, Continue, it's an extension inside VS Code and JetBrains. It's super powerful, especially in the enterprise, because you could run coding extensions or agents specifically in air gap solutions situations. So like if you work at a large DoD, you're not going to be like, basically there's some SaaS agents I don't want to call out, but there's like the number one that doesn't quite work in that situation. So like what we have is an air gap solution that you can get the same models, you can get the same code generated, but you can also train it on your own models. So like Apple itself, they use internal models that no one knows about because they don't talk about. But what I'm getting at is like we have a way for you to connect into some custom experience. So that experience is very different in the enterprise than for like the sort of run-of-the-mill SaaS. So my role today is really just fixing onboarding to make sure folks can leverage a tool pretty quickly, which I think we're pretty much there as of Friday. So now what I'm going to do is go test this out and build case studies with other folks to tell the story. And then I'll turn to like the DevRel side where we go to events and do a lot of stuff. But this is week 5 for me. And I think I pretty much have a good foundation to start doing more the DevRel side.
Yeah. I know you're brand new at Continue, but I assume at some point one day down the road, you'll start another company and you probably will start thinking about it now. So excited for whatever you do next.
Yeah, for sure. Like this is the goal. I actually took this role because I had a connection with the investor.
Yeah.
And I was consulting actually for Continue for a few months prior, and I saw there was a lot of need for my skill set. So I decided to go ahead and take the role full time because it was hard to give the list of things that should be done and like no one there to do them. So I opted to be that person. But I 100%, I'm in the space because I think I can build something in this space that will be super, super useful for a large amount of folks. So I'm still scheming and building some testing what I'll build next eventually.
Yeah, never stop scheming, please. So Vogue does this great interview format, 73 questions, super rapid fire. We're not doing 73. Usually it's like a famous person walking around their fancy house. We're not doing that either. So quickly, what's one thing in your tech stack that you'll never compromise on?
Vim. I think I will always try to get Vim somehow ingrained. It's all muscle memory at this point.
Yeah. One tool or product you wish existed but doesn't yet.
That's a good tool or product, man. I need more abstractions on Kubernetes, more DevOps abstractions, which I think actually exist. I just can't think of the names and I haven't used them yet, but I'll get there.
Yeah. First thing you built that made you feel like a real builder.
I built an app called Hustlin', which told me when there's baseball games in San Francisco.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I don't like baseball,
I
but
don't
the
either.
GitHub office was right next to the stadium.
Yep.
So I had to know when I could go in and when I couldn't.
Yes.
So it would just text me when there was a baseball game.
I used to live next door to that stadium and it was a nightmare.
Uh,
So smart. Most overrated advice you hear in startup circles.
I think grinding, like I think you got to sleep sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's good to grind every now and then, but you got to rest
Yeah.
because you do bad work when you don't rest.
Yes. Underrated advice.
Underrated advice: drink water. It's honestly, it's running a company, knowing like keeping your health like at check at all times. It's amazing like how bad you perform when you just kind of like let that go out the door. So like sleeping, drinking water, stay hydrated.
So true. So true. Worst startup idea.
Worst startup idea, man. That's I don't know. I mean, everything's worth a shot at least. I don't know. Uber for kids.
Yeah.
I think like there's a lot of barriers around that. I don't know
Yeah.
if I would throw my kid into a random Uber, which I don't think
Yeah.
actually got off the ground.
Yeah. Okay. First concert.
First concert, I used to go to a lot of jazz festivals with my dad when I was a kid. So would watch like random person from Earth, Wind and Fire, which I can't name, but yeah, I just grew up on jazz and Motown.
Nice. Last concert.
Last concert, and I was actually at a drag festival in Oakland, and I can't name who was on the stage, but
Yeah.
they were really working it.
I went to
but
one
yeah,
yesterday. It was Pride in New York, and like it was the most fun day. I think it was hot, but it was fantastic. Favorite analog hobby or activity?
analog hobby, man. I just got into jump roping just recently. I,
What?
f- I feel like it is a great workout. And
It
at
is
my
good
age, I
cardio.
feel like I'm looking for ways to hack myself
Yeah.
into health.
Yeah. Okay. Favorite season?
Fall, for sure.
Same. Okay. Favorite TV show?
Man, I really like it Severance. I know it's like it's
Yeah.
just ended, but I'm looking forward to. I feel like the next season is probably going to be the last one that's good if they go past it, because
Yeah.
3 seasons usually the max, but Severance for sure.
If you could live anywhere, where would it be?
Anywhere. I know you live in New York. I'd love to live in New York.
Yeah.
My partner has never been a fan, and I think when we retire, hopefully in the next few years, I think I'm gonna get a place out there and
Yeah.
spend a lot of
It's a
time
good
there.
time. There's a lot to do, and it's a good time here. Favorite way to relax? Jump roping?
That's the opposite. You know, that's I'm usually out of breath at that point. Man, I've been doing a lot of async programming, so vibe coding.
Yeah.
I'll like do some housework. I'll like sit and read a book, but then
Yeah.
like mess with the agent to like go fix my test. So it's been a vibe lately.
That's wonderful. All right. Best advice you'd give your 20-year-old self?
Man, best advice is probably don't wait. Like I feel like
Yeah.
I had to put a lot of things in a row. I got an MBA. Like felt like I had to check a lot of boxes before I could go try something. And I think I could have tried stuff earlier. I think I waited.
Yeah.
First startup company I worked at was 27. I worked at only in corporate prior.
That resonates. Same. Like I think we should have just started early. And 3 words to describe yourself.
This might be a joke, but tall, dark, and handsome.
I mean, you got to be your biggest fan, right?
Yeah.
My last question, and probably one of my favorite. We all have people in our careers and personal lives that we've learned so much from. Who is that for you?
Who's that for me? Man, I've had like some really good mentors that came out of GitHub. I would say Kyle Daigle, who's current CEO, super helpful, always has
Yeah.
time to kind of chat and sit. The last couple years, running a company, he's been like a champion for OpenSauced and for my career at GitHub. So
Yeah.
super big fan of him.
He's incredible. He's always been incredible. I've never had a negative experience with him. He is so great. So yeah, thank you for chatting with me. It's always a pleasure. I learned a lot. I'm gonna go search for all the companies you mentioned because I'm always trying to learn.
Yeah, I'll tell you that one offline.
Yeah, totally. And I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're busy and it's early there. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.